Hi, friends. LA Progressive back with you. This is Dick and Sharon. We'd love to have you watch and read the articles we're associated with. Today, once again, we're delighted to have Mark Fancher with us. He's interviewed with us several times and written articles with us for a number of times, wonderful articles. He's a lawyer, prolific writer. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much. As we were talking before we started recording, my thoughts and prayers are with you and everyone else in that area because of Mother Nature.
Yeah, yeah. So for those that don't know, the LA Progressive is brought to you from Los Angeles. Dick and I actually live just a couple of miles from the Eaton Canyon fires, and we've been almost inundated with people wanting to tell their stories and seeking resources and information. And we appreciate everything that everyone is doing because it's times like this where you see the best of people, but you also see the worst of people, which brings us to your wonderful article that we've titled "The Spiritual Death of a Nation." Mark, talk to us about this spiritual death that you see, which we rarely hear about, because when people think of Christianity these days, they're often thinking of white Christian nationalists, but there's a whole progressive movement, and I would like for you to address that.
Sure. Capitalism is a vicious system, heartless and cruel, amoral and immoral, and it commits many crimes. But I think one of the worst crimes that it commits is that it hammers away at people so hard on a day-to-day basis that it essentially reduces them to the state of wild animals. One of the things that distinguishes us as a species from the beasts of the field is that we have the capacity to be sensitive to others, to be empathetic, to reflect on the needs of our communities, to work with each other, to love each other, to be in communion with each other. And unlike the human species, so many animals are just looking desperately from day to day for ways to survive. Where can they go to take refuge from the elements? Where can they find food, something that they can kill, something that they can scrounge from the ground or from a tree? And human beings were not intended to live that way. But capitalism makes many people live that way. And I think that because of the devastation that's been wrought by major corporations and wealthy families and individuals who've used their privilege and their wealth to exploit, the deliberate efforts of demagogues to create division and hatred, that people have just been beaten down over many generations. And it has put them in the position of now being concerned only with survival of self at any cost, even if it means stepping on others, causing harm to others, excluding others, oppressing others, killing others. It does not matter. It's a question of looking out for number one. And I think that that has been so much a factor in the lives of so many people in this country for so long that we have reached a point where on a spiritual level we really are practically dead. That so many communities have lost the ability to be concerned and loving human beings. And the article was intended to flag that phenomenon because I think it's particularly relevant during this time when we're able to see the product of that type of existence in the form of the current administration.
So one thing that struck me between the two of us, I've been more in favor of the Democratic Party, um, less so as time has gone on. But you make the argument that neither party is going to save our bacon, that there has to be a movement to come about, and I'm more persuaded of that if I had some idea of how that movement would come together. Do you have some ideas on that?
Yeah, and just at the outset, I think it's important to, at least from my perspective, to recognize that both of those parties, the Democratic and the Republican parties, in my view, are part of a con game. President Biden, in his closing remarks, made reference to an oligarchy, his fears of this oligarchy that was taking shape. I think he's just way off base because this oligarchy has been present from the time that the country has been in existence. It was established by an oligarchy, wealthy elite men who created an entity, a country that was intended to provide opportunities for them to exploit others for the purposes of enriching themselves. That's the whole idea. I mean, even to the point of Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, which makes passing reference to enslaved Africans as being three-fifths of a human being, that was solely for the purpose of exploiting other people and not for their benefit. I mean, it was intended to give Southern planters, who, as a white population, sparsely populated that region, an opportunity to have what they regarded as fair representation when it came to congressional apportionment. Since they were not living in areas that were as densely populated as the North, then they could count these enslaved Africans that they owned as three-fifths of a person for purposes of apportionment. So from the beginning, this country has been exploiting and manipulating the vast masses of people. And the Democratic and the Republican parties were intended as part of that game, that charade. They understood that exploitation does not sit well with the exploited and the oppressed, that at some point they're going to resist. And they needed to provide an illusion. They needed to provide an opportunity for people to feel like they had an avenue for voicing their grievances and having their concerns addressed. And so they created two parties. One of them has a personality that is shaped by those issues that the oligarchy cares absolutely nothing about. The Democratic Party has free reign to take whatever positions it wants to take on matters involving birth, sex, marriage, and other social issues. But when it comes to the issues that are of concern to those who are powerful, the multinational corporations, the military industrial complex, rich individuals and families, and we're talking about the economy, we're talking about war and the military machine. When we're talking about those things, both parties are walking lockstep in line with each other. There is no discernible difference between the two. And so it's intended to ensure that these people are always able to control the political situation in this country. And it doesn't matter who gets voted into office, both parties have the same agenda. And so when you're dealing with something that's that cynical, something that is so based in material gain, when you're talking about spiritual rebirth, neither of those parties are the place to look because they've got a mission, and that's to keep the people fooled and deceived and chasing their own tails, running on a treadmill, trying to change a system that by design can't change as long as you confine yourself to those two parties. And so my suggestion has been that, first of all, people of goodwill and who want to breathe humanity back into the humans who live in this country, that they divorce themselves from all of that for that purpose, and that they set an agenda which is not tied to the agendas of either of those parties. Both parties at this point, unfortunately, have as part of their agenda the devastation of Gaza, the elimination of its infrastructure, and the genocide of its people. This movement that I talk about would have to be one that says we're not part of that, that we stand apart from it, and we're going to let the world know that we're not a part of that. We're going to go right to the people of Gaza and throughout Palestine and let them know where we stand and that we stand in solidarity with them. And that, not only provides them with some encouragement, but hopefully helps to embolden those who have been deceived by Zionist lies, helps them to look more closely at what's going on and helps them to maybe themselves break out of this situation, this state of mind that I think the country's been locked into. I think that on so many other levels, this country has an agenda which runs counter to what's best for human beings. There's this war against immigrants. Uh, the churches, the social groups and clubs, and others who are concerned about their neighbors must look at this and say, I don't care what U.S. policy is. I'm offering sanctuary to people who are seeking refuge. I'm extending the hand of brotherhood and sisterhood to these people who are coming here because the U.S. has wrought havoc in the countries from whence they've come. And helping people to understand and to regain a sense of looking out for each other. First Nations continue to struggle. We celebrate the release of Leonard Peltier, but he's only one man, and there's so many other people who are struggling in those communities. Everybody who's been marginalized and excluded, this movement would be one that reaches out to them and says that we're all family. And so I know that sounds a lot like kumbaya and pie in the sky, but at the same time, it's something that's terribly missing from the social scene in this country. And as I said, it's vital that we regain that if we have any hopes of seeking a political solution to a lot of the problems that we have, because we're in a very dangerous situation. Even if we were able to provide the masses of people in this country with a political analysis that they were willing to buy into, they're spiritually ill-equipped to carry it out. One of the things I make reference to in the article is the fact that if you really tried to go into white working class communities and organize the people there in a campaign against the government or a revolution against the government, that you would have a lot of people step forward because there are a lot of angry people in those communities, a lot of people who've got grievances against the government. And they're people who are ready and willing to throw down against the government in a very militant kind of a movement against it. But you would not have what you find in many countries that come together for revolution. I make specific reference to Nicaragua in the 1970s, the Sandinistas. You wouldn't have that. What you would have is you'd have the January 6th mob. That's their mentality. They're so filled with hatred, suspicion, that they would not have the type of feeling or spirit of goodwill that would result in a genuine revolution. And just to illustrate the point, in 1984, I was part of a solidarity delegation to Nicaragua, celebrating the fifth anniversary of their having overthrown Anastasio Somoza and commenced a real revolution there. And my group was being taken on a tour of several villages in a rural area. And everywhere we went, the children would run up to us and they would not beg for money. They would say, could you give me a pencil, please? I want a pencil. Please give me a pencil. Because they really were so committed to trying to learn and they wanted pencils for school.
Oh,
And we went from one village to another, and I guess it probably was about three-quarters of a mile in between the villages. And I looked over my shoulder and I saw this little boy running as fast as he could, running as fast as he could. And so I told the group, hold up, this kid's trying to catch us. And so he runs up to us and he's out of breath and he's sweating. And so he said, what's the matter? What's going on? And so he pulls out a ballpoint pen and he says, one of you drop this.
Oh,
wow.
I mean, and so, that comes not from, reading political manuals or
mm,
listening to demagogues preach.
mhm.
That comes from something that's a part of who a society is and
Yeah,
what they represent as human beings. It is the reason why a revolution in Nicaragua has a very different character from what it would have in this country if we were trying to prosecute one. And for those who are impatient and say, there's this urgency because of what Trump is doing, we need to figure out a political response to it. That would be ideal if we were able to do that. But we're not equipped as human beings to do it effectively right now. And there's no time like the present to start, uh, re-equipping the people of this country with what they need in terms of their morality, their spirituality, and their just fundamental concern about the welfare of human beings.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for those words of wisdom. I don't know where people would get the kind of information that they need to really change their hearts, is what you're talking about. That's a very touching story about this little boy running to return a ballpoint pen. Um, you and I both know that that would not happen in the United States. But how do we get from where we are to having the heart of that little boy?
Yeah, and I think where he got it, I mean, I don't know, I didn't interview him, but I mean, Nicaragua is very spiritually grounded in Catholicism, and I don't know that any particular religious faith is necessarily superior or better than any other. But I do think that on a very basic level, uh, people should at least spend some time contemplating our reason for existing, who we are and where we come from, and the fact that there is a certain dynamic in the universe that people in different cultures and different countries perceive in different ways. But ultimately, most cultures come to the realization that there's something greater than ourselves. And the clues to it can be found in sacred texts. I'm a fervent Christian, and I find great inspiration in the Bible, particularly the wisdom of Jesus' teachings. Many Christians say that his great contribution was that he died for our sins and all of that. I think personally, his greatest contribution was speaking in a way and with a depth of wisdom and insight into the human condition that has been surpassed by no one. No figure has spoken to who we are as human beings with as much power and insight and wisdom as he did. And that's whether any people want to believe in his connection to divinity or not. If you look at the power and the wisdom of his words, then you will have a better understanding of not only who we are as human beings, but how we can best live. Because the truth be told, that even many people who are really strong Marxist Leninists, people who are committed to socialism and materialism and the life that socialism promises, uh, if they would take a look at the book of Acts and look at how the first century Christians lived, you will see that they constituted what I believe was probably the very first socialist society, because Jesus himself and his followers were living in a situation that I've often compared to the situation of oppressed communities of color in this country. In first century Palestine, they were living under occupation by an empire from Rome. They were dealing with what was the then equivalent of police brutality on a daily basis. Their labor was being exploited. They were being cheated and abused by crooked merchants. They were overtaxed, if you want to call it that, and they just faced grinding poverty of many kinds. I think that if you look at how Jesus responded to that, then we can learn great lessons about how we can and should respond. When he was asked, "What do you do about the empire?" when there were people around him who were urging him to wage guerrilla warfare against it, his response was essentially, "We're not part of it. We're just not part of the empire. Give Caesar. Caesar minted this coin. Give it back to him. But what he cannot take is what God gave to us. The labor that created that, the intellect and the talent and the skill that that represents is something that belongs to God, and he cannot have it. And what he did is, among his community, he encouraged all of them to take all of their material possessions and to put them in one pot. And for those who had need, they would come and take from that pot whatever it is that they needed for food, for clothing, for shelter. And then they would put back into the pot. And that sounds strikingly familiar, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs.
That's right.
Um, and it goes even a step further than that. I mean, that's when they were living in a communal kind of a situation. In the book of Acts, their community had grown into the many thousands of people, and it was multi-ethnic and multiracial. And so you had the Greeks who were living in that community who came forward and started complaining that they thought that they were getting cheated in the daily rations. And so the people, the apostles who were really focused on spiritual teaching and spiritual guidance said, we can't get involved in that. And so they appointed a committee of people who would be responsible for making sure that the distribution of the resources was fair. And I regard that as the first socialist government.
Mhm.
And so, you know, the lessons and about how to deal with the problems of the day are answered, and were answered thousands of years ago. We just have been stubborn about not listening to those lessons and instead listening to the modern day, you know, scalawags and rascals and demagogues who come and try and take control of our lives.
Yeah.
So I was struck by a phrase you quote from Martin Luther King, where he talks about he had spent his life working for integration, but he was afraid toward the end of his life that black folks were integrating into a
Burning
burning house. Uh, and you know, as a young man in the 60s, even as a teenager, I was on the edge of the civil rights movement, and perhaps naively, definitely naively, I thought the divisions between the races were going to come down. They were going to fall down over the course of my life, that the old white Ku Klux Klanners and the haters would die off and they'd be replaced by love and harmony. And especially right now, that's not the way the world is going. Division, racial hatred, attacks on DEI, attacks on wokeism. What is being glorified now, currently at this moment, is white supremacy. Do you think we'll get over this and move it all towards my naive dream at any point?
Well, to some extent, yes, and to some extent, no. I think what I've observed and had reactions that are similar to yours is that people are more open to living like human beings should live when they're not concerned about or worried about their material possessions. So that when I was coming of age, you know, when I was a kid in my teens, it was during the 1970s. And though now people, I mean, though then people were complaining about inflation and things like that, relatively speaking, people were doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And I felt that racial tension had declined a significant amount during the mid 1970s, late 1970s. I mean, people were exhausted from the 60s and all of the racial division and tension. And so we entered this era, which I thought was pretty ridiculous back then, of being obsessed with boogie fever and disco and silly things like that, and bell-bottom pants and stacked heels. And you know, people generally on a day-to-day basis sort of got along. I mean, certainly racism had not vanished, but I think that there was less tension, less stress. And I think that people were more open during that kind of a period to thinking through, you know, who we really are as people and how we should relate. And tensions seem to escalate when people are more desperate. And I think that I don't think that, you know, some people, some socialists believe that bringing about socialism will end racism. I don't believe that. But what I do think is that it will create conditions which will make it easier to deal with the race problem than during periods when people are really stressed out and worried about where my next meal is coming from and open and prone to lies that are being told about why their circumstances are so desperate. You know, listening to people who tell them that the reason that you're having trouble is because people are coming across the border.
Right.
Uh, Listening to people who tell them that you don't have opportunities because of DEI and affirmative action, and and opportunities going to people who really don't deserve them, and it's simply because of their race or their gender or something else. So we need to continue, as part of our struggle to regain our morality and humanity, to also continue to fight for economic justice, to ensure that there is at least the opportunity for people to sit back and reflect on who they should be.
Yes, I agree with you, Mark. Like you, I think we've already established that you and I are about the same age, and so we came up around the same time. I've come to see that the problem that we have with the racial, along the racial divide, one of the main factors is that we are in fact divided, physically divided, geographically divided. The Supreme Court, I bring this up often, in 1954 found that it was unconstitutional to have segregated classrooms because and the reason is not because it's so great to sit next to someone who is of a different race. It's because of the inequitable distribution of the resources, as well as the lack of opportunity to get to know people, understand people, and not have these misinformed ideas about the differences in the races. And being married to a white man, Dick and I have been together for more than 20 years. I've come to see that, yes, it really is possible for us to be on the same page. But we didn't start out that way. Early in our relationship, it didn't start out that way. We had to talk and learn from each other. And that is one of the major deficits in this country. We talk about it being the most racially they called it the melting pot, but now we know it more as a salad. And I mean, we have more races in this country and ethnicities than any other country. However, we are so geographically divided that we don't really have an opportunity to learn from each other. So
Yeah,
I have hope though.
yeah, and I think that even when we have the opportunities, that those are derailed by external forces. You know, racial division, racial chauvinism, racial superiority and supremacy, those notions those are not part of who human beings are. And that's proven by history. There was really no such thing as white supremacy until, the 16th century or thereabouts.
Yeah.
The ancient texts and ancient history make it clear that people were not really dealing with race as a concept. And it was strategically and purposefully introduced as an idea to justify colonization, conquest, and slavery.
Yes, that's right.
And so even now, if you watch very young children interact, they're interacting, you know, with no notion of racial difference as being something that's a factor in their lives. It's only as they become older
Yeah.
and they reach stages in their lives when they start to have to compete, whether it's in school or for jobs or other things, that all of a sudden people begin to change and they become susceptible to the idea that certain people are getting opportunities that I should have. And it's the only reason that they're getting those opportunities is because of their race. And that kind of thing takes hold very easily within a society and an environment that nurtures and encourages that type of thinking. So it's very deep seated, and my great fear is that it is so much a part of the fabric of life, not just in the United States, but globally, that we may not ever be able to really totally purge it from our thinking and our consciousness, which is very depressing.
Yes, it is.
Well, Mark, each time I read one of your articles, and you delivered a wonderful talk here, I'm moved and informed. I'm really glad that I get to participate in it. It's quite an honor,
It
actually.
is. It is.
Oh, no, the honor is mine, and I'm so grateful just for the platform and the opportunity.
Well, we hope to be talking to you again soon. I'm very interested on your take on how the white Christian nationalists were so successful at co-opting what it means to be Christian in America. It's just a thought.
Yeah, well, if you play to the fears of your flock, and you appeal to their lowest and most base instincts, and then tell them that God wills it, you got them.
Wow.
Well, great, Mark. We look forward to your next article and our next get together. Thanks so much.
So
No,
long.
thank you so much.
Have a Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.